When people talk about Africa, they often fall into the trap of discussing it as if it were a single, uniform country. This area chart compares the landmass of Africa directly against other major global regions to show its actual physical size. It is the second largest continent in the world, making up roughly 1/5 of the Earth's entire land surface. It is home to over 1.2 billion people who speak anywhere from 1,200 to 3,000 distinct native languages. So how did one continent become so incredibly fragmented and diverse? The answer begins with the violent, extreme geographical forces that originally shaped its surface. To understand the complex political reality of modern Africa's 54 independent nations, we have to look first at the ancient mechanics of its map. Much of North Africa is defined by the Sahara Desert, a massive, hot, and brutally dry expanse of sand and rock. This global map shows wind currents moving across the eastern hemisphere. Wind moving east to west usually brings rain, but this moisture is entirely blocked thousands of miles away by the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, starving North Africa of that incoming water. Along the northern coast, the Atlas Mountains create a second blockage, preventing any coastal rain from moving inland. This double rain shadow starves the interior of regular rainfall, meaning there are virtually no deep river networks or surface water sources across the entire region. Life survived this extreme environment by relying entirely on deep underground water sources. When those break the surface, they create tight, localized oases. Because of this geography, early populations couldn't spread out evenly. They were forced into highly specialized, isolated pockets of survival. Further south, the conditions reverse completely. The equator cuts directly through the middle of the continent, bringing massive amounts of rainfall and thick rainforest biomes. Running down the eastern side is the Great Rift Valley, an extreme topographical zone carved out by tectonic forces, filled with high mountains, active volcanoes, and deep lakes. This valley creates a vertical stack of ecosystems, from alpine heights to savanna floors, all in close proximity. This lets species find specific niches right next to each other, remaining the only continent supporting such a massive variety of large native mammals. Long before any external contact, highly advanced civilizations adapted to these distinct biomes. The Egyptians mastered the Nile River Valley, while groups like the Mali Empire built massive wealth in the West. By mastering these specific hubs, early societies turned geographic isolation into a strategic advantage. The surrounding deserts and dense forests acted as natural fortifications, allowing these groups to develop complex, centralized political structures that eventually coalesced into regional powers. But centuries of this natural, biome-driven development were violently interrupted. Between the Arab and Atlantic slave trades, external powers extracted an estimated 30 million people from these adapted societies. This massive demographic extraction was followed directly by a wave of European colonialism that swept across the continent in the late 19th century. This map shows how European powers completely ignored the natural geography and established cultural lines we just explored. Instead, they drew rigid, arbitrary colonial borders straight through mountains, rivers, and communities. By 1914, this artificial carving of the map was so thorough that only 2 states remained fully independent: Liberia and Ethiopia. European mapmaking trapped incredibly diverse and sometimes historically conflicting groups within the same artificial borders. It laid a geographic trap that would dictate the region's modern history. The pushback against the colonial map gained major traction in the mid-20th century. In 1951, Libya became the first former colony to achieve its independence, kicking off a massive wave of sovereign movements. But the resulting 54 modern nations largely inherited the old arbitrary boundaries. Locking in those artificial borders fueled devastating conflicts over resources and identity, like the civil war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which has cost millions of lives. Today, there is a distinct counterforce to this historical fragmentation. The African Union was built specifically to stitch the continent back together. Operating as a federated commonwealth, the AU's explicit goal is to transform 54 legally separate countries into a massive cooperative economic community managed by a central parliamentary government. Africa is sculpted by intense global weather systems and fractured by a deep history of exploitation. Yet today, it is defined by over 1 billion people actively working to turn 54 distinct nations into a single, unified powerhouse.